Wells Church. Thank you for coming. This is the fourth talk now in our series called Prayer and Our World, and we're looking at various issues in contemporary society and how the life of prayer and the Christian faith can help us engage with that and help us think about those different issues. So today I'm very excited to introduce Alison Webster, who I know some of you know already, who works at the Diocese of Oxford, based in Church House up in Kidlington, and her job title, if I put it right, is Deputy Director of Mission Social Responsibility. Is that correct? Where she heads up a team looking at various issues to do with social justice and social awareness and community organising. But she'll tell you a lot more about that. So welcome, Alison.
Sorry about that. Will it mess up your video if I move this slightly?
No.
No. Well, good afternoon. Great to see you. And thank you for coming to explore an aspect of a topic which, when it was suggested, I thought, oh yes, passionate about mental health, passionate about well-being, passionate about prayer, but actually to think about bringing the two things together and what happens when you do that was a really interesting process for me. So I hope that we can have a discussion about how these two really important aspects of our spiritual life, because I think obviously mental health is a crucial part of our spiritual life, how these can interact. So I'll just say a bit more about me and my story, because I think it will help set the context. Yes, I do work with the diocese, and I have done for very many years, and there are some familiar faces here, which is great. Mental health has often been, in fact consistently been, I'd say, a very key aspect of our social justice agenda. And that's both in pastoral terms, caring for people, but also in justice terms, in terms of challenging unjust structures, thinking about how the context of the world we live in impacts upon us and our well-being and our mental health. We obviously cover a lot of issues in the social justice agenda, but it's interesting to me both that that's always been an important part, and there are people here that have been part of that work and are part of that work, but also the ways in which it's changed over the 16 years that I have been in the diocese. Currently, I'd say it's very high up the agenda in terms of how we speak into the world around us and the society around us, and what it is we feel as a faith community we can offer, which may be distinct from what other organisations and others can offer. And I think it's there that the connection with issues of prayer are very important, and I'll say more about that. I think it's also important to say that I am a member of the LGBT community, which means that for a long time I feel I have inhabited a marginal space in terms of church. That place where you're kind of accepted but not accepted, you belong, you don't belong, you're not quite sure. And I think that's true for a lot of people with particularly enduring mental health issues within our churches, that you're kind of accepted but you're not accepted. Do you belong? In what sense do you belong? In what sense does some of the things that you bring impact on the spirituality of the church, the theology of the church? I am committed to, and I know from my experience with colleagues that I've worked with over the years who have experienced mental distress, that there is an incredible richness in terms of how we relate, how they relate to God, how they are spiritual, and the ways in which they embrace God as part of their lives, both in terms of healing and recovery, but also just in terms of how they live and how we bring correctives to theologies that can often be like the rest of society, success-driven, shiny, happy people-driven, unrealistic, shall we say. I, like probably very many people, also have experience of mental illness and distress in terms of experiencing anxiety and depression on and off over the years, and that's important too. And I'm a writer, and I'm not an academic writer, but a spiritual, experience-based, reflective writer of practical theology, and particularly on issues of identity and sexuality and gender. All those things I say because I think it's because of all those things that I feel the way I do about the intersection between prayer and mental health. Now, in terms of the way I go about writing, it's hard to claim the identity artist, because that makes me feel like I'm making myself more important than I am. But I think there is something about being an artist which I do share, which is the sense that when I write important things, I don't mean church reports or anything like that, I mean important things to do with identity and self and others, I'm aware that that involves a particular process, a particular kind of process, which is bringing in stuff from beyond myself. And I think artists will describe that. They'll talk about the bestowing of a gift, an idea, the muse, whatever, that sense that something is working through you, and it's not just you that is performing. So there's a sort of sense of transcendence, I guess, in that, and connection. And there's a wonderful writer who I love called Lewis Hyde, who is a Canadian poet, and he writes about the gift economy, and he's speaking as an artist who operates in a trade economy, but for whom the gift is really important, the gift of an artistic idea, which is then honed by the skill of the artist to become something that is then put out there. And in putting it out there, you pass on that very important gift. And I think for me, writing prayers for publication is a bit like that. It's or for use in any public worship context. It feels like being in an artistic process of receiving a gift that's bestowed, and then with an imperative to pass it on, to be received by others. So writing prayers to me is not about a performance, it's not about doing something from my own skill or from my own wordsmithery, although that is obviously important, but it's about being faithful to and careful with what I'm being given. And if something is received well, if it resonates, even with one person, even if one person says, that really helped me to make sense of what's going on for me, to me, that's the job done. Hopefully it will resonate more widely, but if it does resonate, even with one person, I think that's a sign that I have in that process served the Holy Spirit in connecting and listening. So today I'm going to focus on two kind of case studies, two prayer case studies. And the first one I'll take you through. We'll pray it, then I'll take you through, for me, what's at work in the production of that prayer and in the engagement with that prayer when people have engaged with it. And then we're going to look at the second one, and hopefully together we can do the same thing. Obviously, that means I am not addressing the entirety of the theme of prayer and mental health. I hope I'll touch on other important things. So, for instance, the role of prayer in worship in a public setting is really important. It's not my focus today, but I think that may be something we could fruitfully discuss as a result of what I have talked about. There is, of course, scientific evidence. I don't have references, but it's there that prayer can be a healing. And I know, anecdotally, from those that I work with, that, for instance, particular kinds of prayer, contemplative prayer, can be incredibly helpful and is a very rich resource to those who experience mental distress, and can be very healing, and is something which in our tradition we should probably give more focus to and more emphasis to in the range of things that we offer. We know that mindfulness in the secular world is recognised as being very important, and I think Christian mindfulness similarly, but we have this amazing contemplative prayer tradition already, which we can draw on. So there are different aspects that I won't be explicitly talking about, but let's discuss them if you've come with a particular agenda. That would be great. So I'm going to give out a prayer to you, what we is affectionately known as the green prayer. Thank you. So let's pray or listen to, if you are not someone who's comfortable with prayer, to this prayer. God of compassion, you meant us to be both fragile and ordinary. Silence the voices that say we are not good enough, haven't achieved enough, haven't enough to show for our lives, that we are not enough. Help us to know that we are treasure. We are prized, we are cherished, we are loved infinitely by you. So be with us in our corrugations of feeling. When our hearts are in downwards freefall, be with us. When our minds race with anxiety, be with us. When our throats close in fear, be with us. When sleep will not come, be with us. When waking hurts, be with us. In the name of Jesus, who knew trauma, abuse, despair, and abandonment, and has nothing but love for us. Amen. So this is a prayer that was written for World Mental Health Day a couple of years ago. The group, the Health, Wellbeing, Social Care group within the diocese, which Margaret here chairs, has often at that time of year thought, what can we offer to people in parishes, to people out there, both to enable people to mark World Mental Health Day as a very important occasion, but also to support people in pastoral ministry in the widest sense. So we decided that we would have a prayer and put it up on the Diocesan website and see where it went. So I just want to talk you through what I didn't think through at the time when I wrote this. So just to say that what I'm going to talk about is something that I have really looked back and thought, what was going on? Why did it come out like that? Because I think and I've only really done that in the last couple of days in preparation for this talk. Partly because it seemed to resonate and all sorts of people have picked this up and used it in various ways. So it made me think, so if it has resonated, what is it? Why? What's going on, and what can we learn from that? So I've got 4 things to talk about. The first one is listening for. The second thing is naming. The third thing is analysing. And the 4th thing is connecting, particularly with our tradition. So let me talk you through those. So listening for and being attentive to. The process of writing something like that for me has in itself to be a prayerful process. It has to be a process where I can travel inwards and think, what's going on within me? What's going on amongst others that I'm close to, people that I know in this context of mental health? Who do I know who talks about their mental distress? How do they describe it? What kind of words do they use? What kind of experiences are they having? How are they describing those experiences? So it's almost like a remembering of listening that may have been going on for a long time, but it's about focusing and saying, what are all those things I have heard from those who are close to me who have experienced the kind of issues and feelings that we want to help and support people with. So it's about listening to myself, it's about listening to others, and it's about listening to the world and saying, what am I noticing about the forces that are at work in the world? It may be status anxiety, it may be lack of self-love, it may be lack of self-worth, it may be endemic loneliness. And I suppose in the job that I'm in, where we're looking at the pastoral implications of all sorts of social forces, it's not hard to notice things in that sense, because they're very real. So listening for and being attentive to self, others and the world are really important, and that's my first category. And someone I've drawn on a lot in this is someone whose work I've drawn on is Carl Rogers, the originator of person-centred therapy. And I'm going to just give you some stuff from him that I think speaks into this in a really helpful way. So he says that, and the person-centred approach, it's a therapy, yes, but it's also an approach that has been embraced in many spheres of life: education, conflict resolution, organisational development. And apparently Rogers was nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize because of his commitment to the promotion of peace in many situations around the world. He famously names 3 conditions to promote human growth and flourishing. And these are empathy, which is hearing and being heard; unconditional positive regard, prizing the other; and congruence, which is about being real. So you'll see why his three conditions have spoken to me quite powerfully in this context. So in explaining what he means by empathy, he reflects on what really hearing someone, and why really hearing someone enriches one's life. Quote, "When I say that I enjoy hearing someone, I mean, of course, hearing deeply. I mean that I hear the words, the thoughts, the feeling tones, the personal meaning, even the meaning that is below the conscious intent of the speaker. I hear a deep human cry that lies buried and unknown, far below the surface of the person. So I have learned to ask myself, can I hear the sounds and sense can I hear the sounds and sense the shape of this person's inner world? Can I resonate to what he is saying so deeply that I sense the meaning he is afraid of, yet would like to communicate, as well as those he knows?" Then he describes how this feels from the other perspective of being heard. "I like to be heard. A number of times in my life I have felt myself bursting with insoluble problems, or going round and round in tormented circles, or during one period overcome by feelings of worthlessness and despair. I think I have been more than fortunate than most in finding at these times individuals who have been able to hear me and thus to rescue me from the chaos of my feelings. Individuals who have been able to hear my meanings a little more deeply than I have known them. These persons have heard me without judging me, diagnosing me, appraising me, evaluating me. They have just listened and clarified and responded to me at all the levels at which I was communicating. At these times, it has relaxed the tension in me. It has permitted me to bring out the frightening feelings, the guilts, the despair, the confusions that have been part of my experience." So listening in that way, to me, as part of the whole agenda of mental health in general, but also in this context, where our prayers come from, is really important. And I think prayers don't have to be written to be articulated on behalf of people from whom we have heard really important things. And I think when we do that, we give more life and more access to those really important feelings that people may reveal to us. So that is listening. It's a huge agenda, and we may want to come back to it in our discussion. So my second thing was naming. And this is about naming reality, which sounds really simple, but actually really isn't. Naming reality with honesty. And again, in terms of the process of writing something like this, it's about journeying inwards again and digging deep and saying, having to revisit tough times and difficult feelings and find words for them, then to check those words out with myself. Is that really it? Is that really a description? Does that really capture how it felt? How close can I get to the reality of feeling? Now, one of Carl Rogers' things, which I don't have a quote for, but something very powerful that he says, which is also, I think, what artists do, is when you can be really honest about your own feeling, the more honest you are, the more you hit on things that people then are actually human universals. So I work a lot with a singer-songwriter who has done that and will sing a song, and people will come up to him after and say, "How did you know that that song was about me? How did you know that about me?" And of course it wasn't about them. I mean, it was about them, but it wasn't written with any knowledge of their life situation or their experience. It was written by somebody who's dug deep into their own self and found a way to be as honest as possible in terms of the way that things are articulated. So honesty, and also, I think, imagination, because it's not just honesty about our own self and experience, it's about connecting with other people's experience. So there's a large part of imagination based on the listening that I talked about earlier. Can I imagine what it felt like for my friend to have this experience? Can I imagine what it feels like for this person to be living with constant distress of being a survivor of sexual abuse, for instance, even though I am not one? Using those commonalities that we have to imagine and enter into someone else's experience as well. So the honesty is about entering into, through our imaginations, other people's experience, because if we can only ever talk about ourselves and not make connection with other people's experience, then we're going to be very limited. And I have another quote from Carl Rogers, which is a short one. This third condition that he has, which the word is congruence, but it means being real. He says, I find it very satisfying when I can be real, when I can be close to whatever it is that is going on within me. I like it when I can listen to myself. To really know what I'm experiencing in the moment is by no means an easy thing. But I feel somewhat encouraged because I think that over the years I've been improving at it. I am convinced, however, that it is a lifelong task and that none of us ever is totally able to be comfortably close to all that is going on within our own experience. So just a recognition that this is a lifelong task, and I think it can be seen in our context as a spiritual task and a task that enables us to pray authentically. So my third category was analysing, and I don't mean that in a highly intellectual way. I mean trying to think, what does this set of feelings mean that we've connected with? And what is it indicative of in how the world is? What is it showing me about how the world is? And what changes do I therefore think it points up that are needed in how the world is? It brings us into the political world with a small p. It brings us into structures and value systems and ways of being and ways of doing and accepted ways of being and ideal ways of being that impact on us in our thought worlds and in our awareness of ourselves. I can't believe there's not something infrastructurally going on in our thought world that is in some way impacting on our young people to such an extent that large numbers of them have eating disorders, are self-harming, and are attempting suicide. I can't believe there's not something bigger. I can't believe it's just about a whole bunch of individuals who happen to, at this point in time, be experiencing that kind of distress. So the analysis is, what are the messages? What is it saying? How can we counter them? So another person that I find really inspiring in this context is the sort of British version of Carl Rogers, really, who is Professor Brian Thorne, who's based in Norwich and is a person-centred therapist. And if I can find his particular quote, so he would characterise our current society like this: judgmentalism, litigious aggression, cutthroat competitiveness, fear of failure are the hallmarks of a society which rides roughshod over the needs and aspirations of human beings made in the image of God, and gives primacy instead to the achievement of economic superiority and the maintenance of what is ironically called a high standard of living. And he says, he doesn't say, I say. There's therefore a need, because of that analysis, to create space for people to articulate experiences that are typically silenced, and to make that space in our church context. To hold that space is a spiritual practice. As a Christian community, I'm not sure we've found adequate ways to hear one another into speech about who we are. We've been too focused on what Rogers identifies as judgment, diagnosis, appraisal, and evaluation. We've set up a system where certain lifestyles are ideal and others are tested and found wanting in that context. And we do to ourselves, as well as experiencing it from without, that oppression, because the forms of control upon us are subtle and internalised. We end up with the ironic spectre of a faith that preaches of God of unconditional love, even unto death, whilst seeing only clay jars and totally missing the treasure. Now, Carl Rogers had a word for that treasure and how we value it. He calls it prizing another. He says, I feel enriched when I can truly prize or care for or love another person, and when I can let that feeling flow out to that person. I have too slowly learned that tender, positive feelings are not dangerous, either to give or to receive. And the effects he describes from the receiver's perspective are equally dramatic. When I am prized, I blossom and expand. I am an interesting individual. In a hostile or unappreciative group, I am just not much of anything. Thus, prizing or loving and being prized or loved is experienced as growth enhancing. A person who loves appreciatively, not possessively, blooms and develops his own unique self, or hers. He was writing a long time ago. The person who loves non-possessively is himself enriched. This, at least, has been my experience. So the analysis bit is really, it's a big thing, because it's about saying, what are we naming in the way we pray, which is giving permission for us to see the world from another perspective and to value things that the world, and actually Christianity sometimes, as part of the world, has not been adequately recognised. So it can be subversive, I guess is what I'm saying. Prayer can be subversive in all sorts of ways, especially in the context of mental health, where society has so many messages about how we're not good enough, and we have so many barriers to self-acceptance and self-love. So fourthly is the connecting, and I mean the connecting. This is what practical theologians do. You look at an issue and then you think, well, what in the tradition speaks into this? That may be something, I've talked about Jesus knowing abuse, despair, abandonment. It may be something from the Gospels, it may be something biblical. It may be something from a spiritual authority within the tradition. But it's about making that move to pulling the experience and analysis back to what we as a community actually believe and think about the world and ourselves and God. So the humanity of Jesus is a really important thing, I think, in this context. It reminds us that we are not meant to be immune to pain and suffering. We're not created to be individuals who have no connection with other people. We're not created to be autonomous and self-sufficient. We're created to be interdependent and to be alongside one another. Brian Thorne again says, I cannot keep to myself the discovery that at the heart of the cosmos there is an energy which calls me into intimate relationship with itself, and through that very calling reveals that it is no it, but contains within itself the essence of personhood. And one of his big inspirations is Julian of Norwich. Julian's pervasive power stems from her absolute conviction, thanks to the visions she received on the 8th of May 1373, that God does not accuse us, because it is not in his nature to do so. On the contrary, Julian tells us that he regards us with the utmost tenderness and longs for us to respond to his love, which is beyond our wildest dreams. The Passion and the Crucifixion are, for Julian of Norwich, evidence of how much we are esteemed and honoured by the God who made us. We are his bliss, we are his reward, we are his honour, we are his crown. So just reminding ourselves of what, as a faith community, we actually believe, and setting that alongside what society is telling us, and helping us to be appropriately countercultural. All of these things, through prayer, I think, in the mental health context, are really important. I just wanted to offer you a PS before I invite us to look at a second case study. My PS is really speaking into the more structural forms of faith, and just to say that some 20 years ago, a close school friend of mine took her own life. Her name was Ashley. She had just turned 30. I was thrown into a maelstrom of inchoate feelings. I think it was called Chaos earlier by Carl Rogers. Chaos of feeling. This came at a time when I was deeply alienated from church and not even sure that I hadn't lost my faith. And yet, to my surprise, in that moment, I instinctively reached out for a priest. I needed someone who embodied the close connection with God that I felt I had lost. I needed someone who was at home with ritual and symbol, fluent in that language and able to say things that couldn't be said with words, to bring out from the experience something new and real. So to be with people at times like this, not with answers or explanations or sympathy, but to hold a space that is agonising and holy and sacred, is, I believe, the spiritual practice to which we are all called, not just clergy. It is mysterious, it is life-giving, it is liberating. In a world of terror and trauma and tragedy, in a world of beauty and ecstasy, where hope refuses to be vanquished, faith can hold that transgressive place where the divine bleeds into the human. Because of that, faith spaces are important. Because of that, the world needs us. We all have a role in listening, naming, analysing, and connecting. And I add that PS because I want to say that prayer is not, having talked about words and why I use particular words and how powerful words and naming can be, another huge aspect of prayer is the wordlessness that comes in many situations and many forms, and for many people who are not verbal, but yet still have a deep spiritual connection with God. So that's what I have to say. I'd like to give out the blue prayer, so that maybe we can look at it together and think about the listening, the naming, the analysing, and whatever the fourth one was, the connecting with the tradition. Or you may want to just, well, let's have a go at that first, and then if there's anything else that you think, feel, want to say, want to express, then we have 20 minutes in all to do that. I'll just wrap it back. So let me read it. God of mystery, where are you when the world flings demands like a rain squall at the window? When the pressure to perform steals us from ourselves? When grasping for our future leaves us empty-handed? Where are you when confusion is in heady ascendance? When digging for surety lacerates and fragments? Where are you in the fray, in the tangled threads of feeling with no beginning or end? God of our depths, be with us. Do not rescue, but hold us. Befriend and reacquaint us with our roots, our core, our true desires. Help us to know the simplicity of refreshment, a single raindrop on dry lips, an offering unsolicited from a cloudless sky. Help us to know how slowly moves the deep, our connection to earth and stars and the life that is you. Help us to know that beyond our striving and our need, all you are is love, and all we have is you.